Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of The Journeymen, a podcast dedicated to the work of overlooked and underrated filmmakers. On each episode, we pick a director who we feel more or less fits that description, and we work our way chronologically through their entire filmography. My name is Bobby Lowe, and I'm here with my co-host,
Michael Pattison.
Please follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen, and you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube. This episode is the first of 3 episodes covering the filmography of Tony Scott. On this episode, we are going to be covering 2 of his early films, 1968's short One of the Missing, and 1970's mid-length featurette, Loving Memory. And then we're going to proceed through his first 5 feature films, 1983's The Hunger, 1986's Top Gun, 1987's Beverly Hills Cop II, 1990's Revenge, and 1990's Days of Thunder. And then we're going to pick up from there on part 2. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about those 2 early films from 1968 and 1970, One of the Missing and Loving Memory.
Hey, that fits you just right. You'll be a lot more comfortable like that. I found your glasses. Very like James's glasses too. Not very strong. This side's all broken. You could maybe wear James's glasses sometimes. I could show you my books. Full of pictures and letters. Took such a long time to make. Every piece has to be stuck in very carefully not to mark it, mind. Can't move marks once you've made them. Don't make books anymore now, though. No more pictures. James took nearly all the pictures I have.
So Scott made Loving Memory, which we've just heard the clip from there, 1970. But before then, also made a film called One of the Missing in 1968. Credited them both as Anthony Scott. And, well, One of the Missing's adapted from an Ambrose Bierce short story of the same name and tells the tale of an American Civil War soldier sent behind enemy lines who falls victim, sort of as collateral damage, if you like, of a battle and is then trapped under the ruins of a fort and then spends much of the 25 minutes sort of envisaging worst case scenarios, and he's fallen in such a way that his own rifle is pointed at his own head, and he's trying to sort of put himself out of his own misery by manufacturing a way by which to pull the trigger. Loving Memory. Is he
trying to kill himself, or is he trying to avoid the gun going off? I couldn't determine which.
Yeah,
at one moment it seems like he is trying to kill himself, and at other moments it seems like he's trying to maneuver the gun so that it's not it's not likely to go off.
Well, let's agree that his mood fluctuates. And then Loving Memory, which has a lot more dialogue, comparatively speaking, although it's not a high bar to clear in that regard.
Or technically has no dialogue, does it? It's all voiceover.
Loving Memory.
Right? Or well, it's
no.
Sorry, it's not dialogue as such because it's just her talking.
It's a monologue, as we
it's kind of a one-sided dialogue, maybe, if you want to put it that way or whatever.
Yeah. So for those of you who haven't seen the film, the monologue that we've just heard is delivered to a dead boy, a young man, played by David Pugh, who's knocked over in the opening scene of the film by 2 people. There's Rosamund Greenwood and Roy Evans, who play a sister and brother, respectively, and who live alone in their rural farmhouse, as opposed to an urban farmhouse. Again, as I said,
hydroponic farm.
Written by Anthony Scott. There's lots and lots of emphases on the soundtrack on birdsong and the sonic textures of the surrounding locales. I mean, I don't really know how much there is to say about these films. They've obviously, the first thing to remark upon is they are extremely different to what was to come.
Yeah, but I mean, we're gonna jump forward 13 years
Yeah,
from this point, and Scott was born in 1946, right? So he's, let's say he's 21 making One of the Missing, and 23 making Loving Memory, and then he's 36 making his debut feature. Like, think about how different you are, even like than you were 12 years ago.
absolutely.
Or are you the same?
I mean, there's certain continuities there, I guess, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'm no longer I'm embarrassing in different ways now than I was 30 years ago. But yeah, and obviously in the interim, he became known as a very successful and efficient commercial director of commercials, as did his brother Ridley. We should also say that he'd starred at this point in his brother's short film, The Boy and the Bicycle.
Yeah, from 1965.
Which you've seen, but I haven't.
Yeah. We'll talk about that when we do Ridley Scott.
Okay.
But well, I mean, let's talk about them. I mean, what did you think of One of the Missing?
I liked it a lot. I liked it a great deal. Actually.
Yeah, I liked it a lot as well. It was good.
It's a great. For me, it's a kind of historical horror film, and I know that it's also referred to in some cases as a western, or flirts. I suppose, with several different genres, but in such a way it's sort of languorous in feel, and it's a place portrait almost that just adapts this short story, which I believe is told as a sort of internal monologue that the film ditches. And it obviously we're watching it in the context of it being an early work by somebody who went on to make very, successful commercial films in Hollywood. But so I don't want to, fall back on that too much in that mythology, but it does feel like, or rather, it's impossible to watch it without being aware of it. Of it being a calling card, if you like, if as somebody's directorial prowess.
You think Jerry Bruckheimer saw this one and snapped him up for Top Gun?
This is the guy.
I mean, would you say that's the guy who made that short? The continuities between One of the Missing and his later action films are more apparent than the continuities between Loving Memory and those later films.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
liked it. I mean, initially it reminded me of like A Field in England. Like that idea of like you can make a movie for no money. Because the rule of thumb is that like if you're going to tell a story and you decide, well, we're going to set it in a historical period, you've just added approximately 30% to your budget. But that's only true if you're like setting it in a town or something, and you got to like it adds to the cost of production design and so on.
Sure.
And post production. But if you're gonna, like what Ben Wheatley did with A Field in England, where you just like rent these old like tatty uniforms and just go out into the field, you go out in the middle of nowhere.
In a field in England.
Yeah, set it in a field, right? So it's a similar kind of thing where it's just like, I mean, I enjoyed it. I think it has a lot of like extreme close-ups that reminded me almost of like when the gun, he's literally staring down the barrel of the gun, and like we're getting these like wild close-ups of his eye that are almost like the extreme close-ups that are used in like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where like they're rolling their eyes around in the sockets.
And it's got like rich, very simple but striking imagery, like the blood flowing or dripping from his ear. And actually, I don't know if you picked up on this, being the arachnophobe that you are, but when the spider crawls on his face, I was like, oh, did Chris Columbus see this before he made Home Alone? Because it's very much like the spider that crawls on Marv's face. In that
the spiders and the flies and everything. Yeah, like it's very good. And I also like the mapping the geography of the rubble. And everything. It's very interestingly done as well. And it has this kind of like impressionistic sort of anti-war humanism.
it's dark and comic
thematically
as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's true too.
Well,
And kind of absurd.
It's typical of an early work, I guess, of a director who grew in many ways. By which I mean he takes a very, very thin premise here and makes it go a long way. I mean, I know it's only 25 minutes, but I was never bored watching it. In ways that I often am watching a 25-minute short. And this could very easily have been quite boring actually, because not much happens. And I think a large part of that is the sound design, and the naturalistic
sound design is great, yeah.
And how
because there's no music, right?
Yeah, there's no music.
There's no music. It's all bird song and gunfire and all that kind of stuff.
Which
I said there's no dialogue, but there is. The other soldiers you do hear them like shouting orders to each other and stuff.
Yeah, and at the beginning when he receives his orders, I guess we hear them.
Right. So one thing is that there's no gunshot at the end, and yet we see him dead. So did you take it that the gun went off and killed him? Because there's no we don't see any bullet wound either. Or has he been there so long that he's died of exposure or whatever? How did you take that?
Yeah, and there's a I don't know how I took it really. It just I was happy to have it ambiguous and leave it at that. But so I took that from his bloody ear that he himself can't hear, so he won't be able to hear the gunshot that kills him. But then he wouldn't anyway. Even if he could hear, he's had his brains blown out. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, well, what would you give this out of 10?
7.
I go with a 7 as well. I liked it. I enjoyed it.
I was just going to say that I watched Loving Memory, I think immediately after One of the Missing, maybe 15 minutes between them. And another thing to remark upon with Loving Memory is the continuity in the aesthetics. So, both films are black and white evocations of locales, if you like, non-specific locations that are imbued with a real sense of grounded, naturalistic ambience. And so in Loving Memory, you've got seagulls isolated on the soundtrack, and again, other bird songs, and also with this one, you've got ticking clocks as well, which we heard in the clip, competing with that sort of natural ambience. And obviously extended sequences here without dialogue as well. And then the introduction of the sounds of flies buzzing around the corpse, which, I don't know, it's quietly harrowing. I think this is darkly comic too, Loving Memory.
Yeah, very much so.
I can imagine it satisfying different interpretations and tonal reworkings, like on the stage, for instance. And by which I mean, it could be taken down a much, much darker route, and it could be, and the comedy could be re-emphasized if it was, or emphasized, sorry, if it was reworked. But it's got sorry.
No, go ahead.
It just another thing to say is that it's got a lasting, for me, melancholy, or a melancholic transport of swell to it, with the introduction of music as well, like You Belong to Me, which is quite a dark song anyway, actually, when you actually listen to or read the lyrics. Did you like it?
I really enjoyed it, yeah. It kind of confounded my expectations twice, because going into it, I expected, I think probably just based on the Blu-ray cover art, which I'll show you now, and listeners can Google it if they want.
Yeah.
I kind of expected something like, maybe like the Bill Douglas shorts, like My Ain't Folk and My Childhood, or maybe like the films that Terrence Davis made or something like that. Yeah. Kind of like a kind of social realist, working class.
Which I think, to be fair,
Not,
the BFI have marketed in such a way, because they've released the Terence Davies trilogy and the Bill Douglas trilogy as well. Yeah.
Yeah. The blurb on the back of the Blu-ray says, well, in terms of it's a summary of the plot, it just says a disturbing tale of a brother and sister who live in isolation with a grisly secret. But that's not accurate.
Yeah.
They're not living with a grisly secret. That's not accurate at all. So they accidentally run over this young man in the street, and they bring him home to their farmhouse, and they're not like, the brother is, his only intention is to bury him. Like there's no intention of like him he's gonna like leave his sister to, like, dress him up and obsess over him and invest him with the personality of their dead brother. See here, okay, so
yeah, there was a third sibling, right? Right.
So there was. I initially took these two to be husband and wife.
Yeah, me too.
I'd forgotten that it says brother and sister, because I took them to be husband and wife, and I took the person who had died in the war to have been their son.
Yes.
And I think psychologically that would make more sense given the way that the film unfolds, because what it actually is a brother and sister whose other brother, like whose younger brother, or so like the living brother is the oldest sibling, and then the sister, and then there was a younger brother who died in the war, so I said that it confounded my expectations twice. So the first time was when they bring the dead body home, and everything's like, okay, this is not like Bill Douglas or Terence Davis. This is something kind of more macabre, and stranger. And then she starts talking to the corpse, and but initially she's talking to the corpse in terms of who she knows the boy, the young man to have been.
Yes.
And she's offering him her deceased brother's things and saying, oh, we'll give you what's the name of the brother?
Joe, isn't it?
Joe. We'll give you Joe's uniform, and like we'll put it on, like here's his glasses or whatever, and like all that kind of stuff. This used to be his room, and now the other brother has started using it as this like storage room. But as the film goes on, in giving the corpse her dead brother's things, she has kind of I don't know if you'd say she did it deliberately, because that suggests a sort of conscious intent, but she has transformed him into her dead brother, and then her address of him starts to shift, and she starts to address him as Joe, the dead brother, and it's like her unconscious mind was like taking that opportunity for her, even though she's not fully aware of what she's doing. Meanwhile, the older brother is like making preparations to just bury this guy that they ran over. But there's no sense throughout that they are committing a crime, even though they are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but it's like they live in such isolation from society that they don't even realize like that there's a procedure that they're circumventing in doing this, like that they should have reported the accident, and it was an accident. Like they didn't actually, if they had just gone to the police, it was just an accident.
Yeah, sure.
But it's like they don't even consider that. It's like, oh, we just got to bring him home to the farm and bury him. Like they don't even know what else to do.
Because
which suggests a real kind of like social psychological isolation for both of them.
Yeah, I mean, it reminded me actually, and especially when you describe it as such, of the League of Gentlemen, the TV series, and Tubbs and Edward living on an inherited farmstead or a local shop, basically, on the moors of Derbyshire, if that's a term that I can use. But I think you're right, because there's that panning shot just after they've knocked him over, where another car comes along the road, and the pan sort of follows the car and then rests on brother and sister bundling this corpse that they've just, the body of the guy they've just knocked over into the car.
Yeah.
But again, it seems to be fortuitous timing for them and they're not like actively trying to hide the fact that they've knocked them over. It just happens to be that the car
almost like they'd ask those passersby to help them. It's like, you know, because she says, like, when she does say at one point that when her younger brother died, that the older brother made a coffin for him.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, well, this young man has died, so obviously he's going to make a coffin for him as well. You know, like, that's just what you do. That's what people do. So the second way that it confounded my expectations was I started to think at that point. I was like, okay, what would she do if? Because this was reminding me, like, you know, not to, you know, resurrect an old habitus trope here, but of Ed Gein and like that kind of scenario.
Sure.
Where like this lonely, disturbed person living alone, left to kind of like externalize their own delusions and realize them in the world, and like draw other people into the orbit of those delusions and kind of, you know, destroy them in the process. So I was asking myself, like, what would she do if her living brother died? Like, what would this woman do at that point?
Yeah.
You know, because this scenario is playing out almost like Norman Bates before his mother died, or something like that. And then, right as that thought entered my head, there was an explosion in the mine.
Yeah.
And she starts talking to where the lead mine where her older brother works, and she turned to the corpse and said with this like sincere kind of concern and worry, you know, what would we do if Ambrose was hurt? The explosion was very big, you know. And I was thinking, oh wow, does part of her wish him away? Does she want to live on her own? Like, is her relationship with her surviving brother kind of is it like the burden of sanity on her or something like that? Would she prefer to abandon herself to her delusions and live in these, like, you know, fuzzy, comforting memories? And then she starts talking about, so that I was thinking, okay, just and this is very much not what I expected from this movie. Like, this is a million miles away from Bill Douglas or Terrence Davis. And then she has, like I was saying, he's used the room as a storage space, and part of what he's stored in there is this gigantic airplane propeller that's suspended from the ceiling, and it's like suspended with these like flimsy little wires. And she starts talking to the corpse, saying, you know, talking about this propeller and like kind of tutting about how dangerous it is, and, you know, that propeller could fall. And then she starts talking about the floorboards and like, and look at these floorboards, they're so dangerous. These floorboards are so dangerous. And I was like, oh my god, she's making a fucking trap. She's gonna try to make a trap to kill her brother so that this corpse isn't buried, because now she's like invested this corpse with the ghost of her dead younger brother. And the reason I said it would make kind of more psychological sense, maybe, if like archetypally, maybe it would make more sense, like if they were husband and wife and their son had died, because you can understand like the mother maybe being willing to, you know, kill her husband to bring back her son. But the brother relationship then is like, well, it kind of just not that it's not a problem as such. It's just it raises questions like, well, why was she so much closer to her younger brother that she would kill her older brother? And it kind of it begs for more sort of character development than we're given, maybe, in that respect. But I was like, oh my god, she's making a fucking trap. This is going to be like, this is actually going to turn into, you know, like, you know, The Eyes of My Mother or something like that, right? And then that doesn't happen, and that's the second way that it confounded my expectations, is that it actually doesn't go that way. The trap goes off, but he survives. We're with her in the other room, and we hear the trap, we hear the propeller fall, and he doesn't realize that she's made a trap for him. He thinks the propeller just fell, and he survived, you know. And so it very kind of narrowly bypasses the psychological horror premise that it's sort of pregnant with, you know. And like I love the way we see her like we're prompted to envision her sort of longed for end scenario really vividly. Like I was already there in my head. I was like, you know, Ed Gein, you know, she's there with her fucking this corpse, like Norman Bates, living alone and just like completely abandoned to her insanity. But then that's not what happens, and we're so invested in that, or for me at least, I was so invested in that kind of trajectory at that point, that when it just proceeds along the lines that were established originally, it has this like really kind of aching melancholy to it.
Yeah.
You know, like as he just proceeds to bury this young man, and at that point, that young man is like her younger brother, and she's like reliving it again. You know, exactly the same way.
Yeah, and I think that doubles the sense of loss at the end. It amplifies the claustrophobia embedded in the concept anyway. And it's also doubly anti-cathartic because it doesn't grant her that climax that you've just alluded to. Yeah, it's.
I actually prefer it. Like even though I'm so into that kind of material, I actually in this case prefer that we don't get the psychological horror scenario, and that it remains a kind of implicitly articulated inner world.
Yeah.
You know, she's never afforded the opportunity that she's kind of subconsciously longs for to externalize that world. That it just remains this kind of like these kind of ossified memories.
Yeah.
I like. I mean, it's. I sympathize with people who see this and go, oh man, I wish Tony Scott had made more films like this. Now I don't necessarily. I feel the same way. I wish that maybe he had made like a couple of feature films in the 70s, and we could see a more gradual transition between this kind of these kinds of interests and you know what he kind of became in the 80s.
Yeah, again, it's just to say like the continuity with One of the Missing as an early work in terms of, you know, film school student taking a thin premise a long way. You know, I mean, you read a synopsis of this, and then, you know, 10 minutes, and I'm thinking, oh, how far can he take this? You know, and as I said, it's got claustrophobia embedded into it, which, and it does develop in interesting ways, but it's still, it's incredibly controlled.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who knows exactly what he's doing in terms of sounds and, you know, racking up tension without actually granting us the catharsis that is suggested by it. So yeah, I mean,
it's what is it? 40 on video. It runs 49 minutes, I think.
Yeah, it's credited,
but
it's 52, something like that.
It's 52, and that would have been the film length. But like, it feels more like a long short, like an extended short, than it does a short feature. You know. Yeah,
definitely.
Like it doesn't feel like, oh man, I wish they could have added 10 minutes to this and made it a feature film or something like that. It doesn't feel that way. It feels like a long short.
Yeah.
What would you give this out of 10?
I'm sticking with 7.
I'm gonna go 9.
Oh really? Wow.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, I thought it was great. So this was the first film produced by Ridley and Tony's production company, Scott Free, and throughout the 70s, they produced a lot of kind of short form material, that the kind of material that wouldn't get listed on IMDb or somewhere like that. But the only other kind of major thing that Tony Scott did was an episode of a French anthology miniseries that was I think it was 6 episodes that were all adaptations of Henry James novels.
Yeah.
And his adaptation was The Author of Beltraffio, which aired in 1976 on French television. And when you look this up on IMDb, there's an introduction to it by Ridley Scott, like a 2 or 3 minute introduction, filmed a couple of years ago, like in 2014 or something. And I was surprised then that the film's not available anywhere. Like that introduction was filmed.
Yeah.
Like that introduction was filmed for it played at some festival.
Yeah.
But why is the introduction on IMDb if the film isn't like on Blu-ray or on the BFI site or something like that? It's weird. So we weren't able to find that movie. It's not really available.
Yeah, I'd like to see it because it feels like, as in general, the anthology should be something that is available, not just the Tony Scott contribution.
Yeah, I don't know if the directors of the other 5 films went on to do anything notable, but certainly. Yeah, I'd definitely be interested to see. Because in the introduction that Ridley Scott filmed, he said, like Tony was best known for his action thrillers and things like that, but he was also a fantastic dramatic director. And we've been saying, you don't really see that at work in One of the Missing or Loving Memory. They're not really dramatic films. So it would be interesting to see him take on a period drama, you know. Okay, so we move on to his first feature film, 1983's The Hunger.
How long is it going to take? How long did the others take?
I don't know.
You must remember, Miriam. I know it's a long time, but it's not the kind of thing that you forget. Lolia, how long did she take?
A week? A few days? I don't remember.
She couldn't sleep.
No, she fed, but she couldn't sleep.
And the one before that?
The same, always the same. I prayed I never lose you. I know what's happening to you. I live with your suffering again and again. I hope that this time with you somehow some miracle. I've never stopped hoping that.
Come here. And who's next? Have you thought about that? Who's to keep you company when I'm gone? I'm sure you have thought about that.
Okay, so moving on to Tony Scott's first feature film, 1983's The Hunger, based on the novel by Whitley Strieber, screenplay by Ivan Davis and Michael Thomas, and produced by Richard Shepard for MGM. Okay, so John, played by David Bowie, is the lover of the gorgeous immortal vampire Miriam, played by Catherine Deneuve, and he's been led to believe that he'll live forever too. Unfortunately, after 200 years or so as Miriam's companion, he begins a quick deterioration into a horrible living death, and Miriam seeks a new companion. She soon sets her sights on Sarah, played by Susan Sarandon, a young scientist researching the causes of aging, who quickly falls under Miriam's spell. However, Sarah doesn't warm up to the concept of vampirism easily, leading to conflict with Miriam. Okay, so I had seen this before a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I hadn't particularly responded to it very well.
Okay.
I kind of remember thinking that it was okay, but always sort of kept me at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
But actually to the extent that I wasn't even particularly looking forward to revisiting it this time. But it really worked for me this time. I was really surprised. And I thought it was excellent.
I was surprised that also, but for different reasons. So I hadn't seen it before. I found it surprising immediately on the terms that I wasn't even aware of this film as being good or underrated in any way. I understand that it has some sort of cult position in Scott's oeuvre. When I was watching it, I was assuming that you were going to really dig it if you didn't already. So I wasn't aware of your previous relationship to the film, but when I was watching it, I was like, oh yeah, Bobby's gonna love this. I liked it a great deal. Okay, I didn't even know it was a vampire film, and it took me a while to figure it out that these were actually.
What was your?
Honestly, I don't know.
How did you approach it?
Even the cover art and the artwork for it, and like. So I'm looking here as I speak at some sort of Bowie's on there, Deneuve's on there. There's like this heart-shaped body on there with the dagger, but it's all very I don't know. On a quick glance, I don't get that from it like that. It's
You knew it was horror though, right?
Not really. No,
you thought Michael Fassbender was in it.
I was like, oh, fucking great, another Irish film. But so yeah, it's not only a horror film; it's an erotic horror film. So within inside of the first 5 minutes, where David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve are sharing like a shower, and then like kissing each other with like blood running down and everything else, I was like, ooh, this is like, how did I not even know like that this existed? Like, I mean, of course I knew it existed, but I didn't know it was this kind of film. Yeah,
Right.
it hooked me from the start. Like, I'm always kind of a big fan of like strong openings like this, where you've got like really strong image of that like silhouetted guy lit from below,
Yeah.
coming towards the camera in a nightclub and like
Mm.
grabbing the cage, but then also cutting away from that to credits like that are just like white on black,
Yeah, yeah.
and then cutting back to that action. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm really digging this. Like, and that's before you even get any sense of like who this film's going to be about and what they are. So yeah, so I was hooked from the
So,
start.
so okay, like I said, I approached this with a pretty vague memory. You know, like it was one of those films where I'm like, what I remembered most about it was the style.
Hmm.
But there were actually like major plot points throughout the movie where I was like, I didn't even, I mean, you know, that kind of feeling of like, oh yeah, now I remember
Yeah.
that part. But you know, if you had asked me what happened, if you had asked me to summarize this film before I revisited it, I probably would have omitted that.
Hmm.
Well, so the opening, there were actually two moments in the movie where I was kind of reminded of later films that are obviously calling back to this. And the opening scene, it's like so The Matrix. You know, like the fashion, the tone.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like once they're in the Matrix with the glasses and the leather and like that whole aesthetic is like the Wachowskis. I'd be shocked if the Wachowskis are not huge fans of this movie.
Hmm.
And that kind of continues throughout, but certainly the opening nightclub scene is very like something particularly maybe from the Matrix sequels or something. Like even the circular glasses that David Bowie is wearing are the same glasses that Lawrence Fishburne wears in the Matrix. Yeah, and this is more kind of art house in tone than anything Scott would ever do again.
Yeah, yeah, it's
And
very
maybe it's. And I was kind of thinking, what if this had been a big hit? Because it wasn't a big hit. It got mixed reviews and it didn't do particularly well financially, is my understanding. And I kind of wondered, you know, if this had been a huge hit and Top Gun had flopped, you know, what would Scott's career subsequently have looked like? You know?
sure. Yeah.
Or you know, if Loving Memory had been a huge hit.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I'll talk about the other thing that it reminded me of a little bit later. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, like it's absolutely gorgeously shot. It has a great score. Like throughout, the imagery is absolutely like magnetic. It's and the score is like this cool mixture of like classical pieces with this kind of discordant, kind of very 80s kind of electronic kind of stuff going on.
Yeah, and the opening needle drop is Bauhaus, isn't it? Bela Lugosi's Dead, which is just like like this throbbing, great track to open a film with, especially a debut feature.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned it being like the most sort of art house or artsy film that Tony Scott made in his career. It actually recalled for me like cinema de look, like, you know, the French films that were being made in the early 80s, which I think this draws upon heavily. I mean, again, in terms of its plot, it's quite thin, right? And he maximizes and directs the shit out of it, which is very much in line with cinema de look, who, you know, which sort of mobilized around stories that were neither here nor there,
Sure.
but have a great gripping quality to them in the way that they're told cinematically.
So are you suggesting that thematically this film doesn't really do a lot for you and it's mostly style?
No. I will come to that. I'm just talking about actual story, the actual synopsis of the film. Like, you know, it's dime a dozen, actually. But no. To answer your question specifically to theme, I feel very much like in line with it. Or
I don't know that I agree that it's dime a dozen. I mean, obviously it's a vampire story, but it's pretty unique.
It is
in its approach, I think. I've never encountered the major plot kind of revelation that I was referring to when I said I had forgotten kind of like key parts of the movie was that, you know, she keeps all her former lovers in these coffins in her attic, in the attic of her New York townhouse, where they will never die, but they will just sort of like.
So they have.
It's an eternal living death.
Yeah, they live forever, but they age.
Yeah. But like so, and he David Bowie's character John eventually begs her to kill him, and she just says, I can't do it. You don't understand. I can't. But she never explains why. Whether it's just like emotionally she can't do it, or because she like can't do it. It can't be done.
Yeah.
But so what she does is she just like puts him in a coffin in the fucking attic beside all these other coffins, and she kind of like lovingly puts her hand on one of the other coffins and like introduces him to the other vampires. And says like, refers to them as my lovers and all this, and like seems like genuinely heartbroken that's their fate.
Yeah.
But like she did it to them, it's a weird kind of thing where it's like she's not portrayed as vindictive or evil or malevolent. She's kind of strangely sympathetic, and even though she's completely inscrutable.
I mean, in the clip we've just heard, she's suggesting that she's been through this again and again and again, and in fact through flashbacks we see the point at which she was turned as a vampire
in ancient Egypt. Right? She's supposed to be kind of 4,000 years old or something like that.
That's right. Yeah.
So, and she has all these art. When Susan Sarandon's character Sarah comes over to the house, she's looking at all these artifacts and she's, talking about them like, oh, that one's 2,000 years old. That's from, this,
Yeah.
And obviously we understand it to be like, well, she actually bought that 2,000 years ago or whatever. And like, I mean, when we talked about on the Catherine Bigelow episode, we talked about Near Dark and the kind of the choice that, or the two kind of like, ways of two ways of approaching vampires as creatures, where in one sense they're very inhuman and demonic almost, like they're like evil spirits in a corporeal form, or you can humanize them and you can kind of medicalize the condition of vampirism, which is very much what happens here, where it's some sort of contaminant in her blood. And it's framed in terms of like scientific research into the causes of aging and the potential to slow or stop the aging process. Here though, they go even further than in Near Dark, where they get rid of the whole thing about vampires being nocturnal. So in this, they're just kind of walking around in the daytime, and like sleeping in bed in the morning sunlight. And it's kind of like, it struck me that's kind of the defining feature. If there's any one defining feature, that's the one defining feature of vampirism, where once you remove that, vampires become completely like socially functional human beings. And yet she still has some sort of ambiguous supernatural powers. It's suggested that she's able to kind of like manipulate people mentally. The part where there's like, she almost causes Sarah to get hit by a truck. And that kind of thing.
Yeah, she seems to beckon Sarah before and anticipate her seduction of her, and Sarah seems to also be somehow telepathically aware of the seduction before she even meets her somehow. And yeah, you're right, it's suggested by that cross-cutting.
There's also a scene where she like appears in the elevator with her or something like that, and she turns and there's nobody there, and it's like she's haunting her in some way. But it's never like defined in terms of like, this is what she's capable of doing or whatever. It's just like has a vague otherworldly character.
So like his early films, there's a sadness etched into the very concept here because of the things that you've just spoken of. Aging, not only aging, but the ideas of immortality and the medical limitations that we have when dealing with those kinds of questions, and the ideas of bodily contamination, which I suppose is of sudden interest in the context of the AIDS epidemic in 1980s America.
Sure.
And what I like is that how that is thematized through the very prioritization of images and surface beauty, which is obviously one of the film's key strengths, but it's also on of a pressing urgency with regard to Bowie's character, John, who is rapidly aging in this very inexplicable but predicted on his part, but inexplicable in terms of, well, how the fuck do we stop this? The makeup, like Bowie's makeup, is incredible, isn't it?
It's very good.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's great.
So I like that there's a connection and justification and rationale for the film's, own beauty, if you like, because it's worked into the very themes of the film. Apparently Bowie, I read, was concerned at the time that it was perversely bloody at points, the film.
Yeah. He said it was very unique, that there was nothing else out there like it, but that he was worried that it was too much blood and splatter in it.
Whereas, like, for me, those are some of the most potent moments. And I'm not just saying that as somebody who's increasingly a fan of horror because of my, connection with the Journeymen podcast and my co-hosts, being a horror buff. But, like, that moment at the end where, Deneuve and Sarandon are having, like, this sort of lover's farewell kiss, and then she stabs her in the throat. Catherine Deneuve stabs Sarandon. And, like, the blood that gushes from that is very, very powerful for me on a visual level and otherwise.
No. Sarah stabs herself in the throat.
That's right, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
because she decides to kill herself rather than be turned.
But she stabs herself in the throat, so the blood is gushing up into her mouth.
Yeah.
And she's kissing Miriam, and forcing Miriam to ingest her blood, and it's like based on like her understanding of what is happening to her blood scientifically. She's trying to kill Miriam.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, like, so the style of the film, and this is really my only criticism of the movie, is that at a certain point, it feels a little bit like an obstacle to my connecting emotionally with the aspects of the story that I'm most drawn to, which are the more macabre stuff, the more macabre elements. Like at the end of the film, after she's been forced to ingest Sarah's blood, Miriam also like undergoes that like rapid aging process. Ages to dust in a few minutes, but she's attacked by all of her former vampire lovers in the attic. These like zombie vampires break out of their coffins and push her over the balcony, and like that stuff is just so amazing. But all the kind of like ultra chic, kind of shiny, all that kind of stuff, there's a little bit of an emotional barrier there for me. And I get it in the sense of like, okay, well, this is all like surface beauty, and behind it is this like horrible kind of like decaying world of zombie vampires, but that's more of a conceptual connection, and it doesn't quite translate to an emotional connection for me. That's really my only criticism, and I don't like, it's not a fatal flaw or anything like that. It's just like a minor thing, I think, because it does work, I think. But a little bit, maybe just a little bit more focus on the macabre side for me would have been preferable, a little bit more, because actually that's not my only criticism. My other criticism would be, because Miriam is never the protagonist. Miriam is always this kind of mysterious figure who we relate to first through John and then later through Sarah. It does give the film a kind of a jerky gear shift in the middle.
Yeah, you're right.
Where once John is sort of confined to his coffin, it's like, oh, now it's Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, he even said in the clip that we've just heard, like, who will take over, who will succeed me, who will take my place, how will, and yeah, I was surprised. It's sort of, it's a strength and a weakness, I suppose, that, the rapidity with which Bowie ages, which provides his arc, if you like, an urgency. But then, once he is confined to the coffin, it's like, well, what, he can't be brought back out, really. So then how do we then... So, I think more could perhaps be made of the triangular element.
Yeah.
Because he meet Sarah
does,
as
exactly.
well.
He meets her first. He's the one who brings her into Miriam's life. By going and looking... he sees her on TV being interviewed about her research or something like that, and he goes to see her to see if she can help him with his rapid aging, and she just thinks he's a crank. and kind of fobs him off, and then he shows up a couple of hours later and he's aged about 100 years, and then she believes him. But yeah, he actually starts looking like Grandpa from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It's right.
But yeah, apparently the studio insisted on having Sarah survive at the end. So we get this like little tacked on thing at the end. So it's like, okay, maybe we can make a sequel if this is a hit. But she was originally supposed to die, but then she becomes like the new Miriam. But like, does she? Because is she not just like one of Miriam's minions? You know, is she not just going to have the same fate as John? It's not really clear why she should be presented in the way that she's presented in the final scene, as though she's like genuinely immortal at that point.
And I think because it was imposed from above, it doesn't really quite make sense.
Sure. I meant to. The other thing was the other thing that reminded me of this. Sorry, I forgot to mention. Was the sex scene between Miriam and Sarah is set to the flower duet from the opera Lakme, which I know from the nude underwater dance scene in Alex Aja's Piranha.
Okay, right.
And I was watching. I was like, that's obviously in Piranha. That's obviously a throwback to The Hunger. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So, out of 10 for this one.
8.
I'm gonna go with a 9. I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah. I mean, yeah, 8.
It's tough to get a 9 out of you.
Yeah, it is. It's extremely tough. But,
so
yeah.
So okay, so like on every Journeyman episode, we cover, you know, unproduced, unmade, unrealized projects in between, but we'll get to that on episode 2 because I couldn't find anything for his 80s career in the Variety archives. So moving on to his second film and his big breakout movie that ultimately came to define him as a filmmaker, really, 1986's Top Gun.
Excuse me, Lieutenant. Is there something wrong?
Yes, ma'am. The data on the MiG is inaccurate.
How's that, Lieutenant?
Well, I just happened to see a MiG-28 Sorry, Goose. We happened to see a MiG-28 do a 4G negative dive.
Where did you see this?
That's classified.
It's what?
It's classified. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
Lieutenant, I have top secret clearance. The Pentagon sees to it that I know more than you.
Oh, ma'am, it doesn't seem so in this case now, does it?
So, Lieutenant, where exactly were you?
Well, thank you, started up on his 6 when he pulled through the clouds, and then I moved in above him.
Well, if you were directly above him, how could you see him?
Because I was inverted.
Bullshit. No, he was, man. It was a really great move. He was inverted.
You were in a 4G inverted dive with a MiG-28?
Yes, ma'am.
At what range?
No, about 2 meters.
Well, it's actually about 1.5, I think. It was 1.5. I've got a great Polaroid of it, and he's right there. Must be 1.5.
It was a nice picture. It wasn't half. Thanks.
Lieutenant, what were you doing there?
Communicating. You know, giving him the bird.
So Top Gun was written by Jim Cash and Jack Epps Jr. and produced by Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer for Simpson Bruckheimer, distributed by Paramount Pictures, and it was released in the US in May 1986. Budget of $15 million and obviously went on to make international box office was $357 million. Obviously, as Bobby alluded to before we heard the clip just now, this was a massive breakthrough for Tony Scott. And as you said, Bobby, it sort of defined his career thereafter in many ways, for better and or worse, depending on preference, I suppose. The film itself, as per Google, is set in the Top Gun Naval Fighter Weapons School, where the best of the best train to refine their elite flying skills. When hotshot fighter pilot Maverick, played by Tom Cruise, is sent to the school, his reckless attitude and cocky demeanor put him at odds with the other pilots, especially the cool and collected Iceman, played by Val Kilmer. But Maverick isn't only competing to be the top fighter pilot, he's also fighting for the attention, apparently, of his beautiful flight instructor, Charlotte Blackwood, played by Kelly McGillis. This is the only film on this episode that I'd seen previously.
Okay.
12 years ago, in my first year of undergraduate degree in Norwich, and me and my flatmates decided it would be a good idea to buy Top Gun on DVD. I don't remember being the person to buy it, but it is now sitting on my shelf. So when we moved out of that flat, I was the one who took responsibility for the longevity of that DVD. I mean, it's a film.
Did you like it? Did you like it at the time?
Precedes it in an ironic way.
Okay.
You know, like when students like films ironically. But I don't remember having any sort of love for it.
Yeah.
And to be honest, if anything, my evaluation of it has diminished somewhat.
Okay.
In the 12 years since. What about you? What's your history with this film?
My last viewing of Top Gun predates recorded history. So I saw it sometime when I was a kid, I suppose. Maybe like a young teenager, maybe. I don't know. Like, it's a long time since I saw it. Obviously, it's been on TV, and like I've seen bits and pieces of it. And I actually watched it. I watched the first hour of it, like early January of this year. Just happened to throw it on, and then I think I fell asleep, and I never went back to it or whatever. But I don't remember having any strong feelings about it one way or the other, really.
Yeah.
Never really connected with it.
It's a film that is whose sum is less than its parts. It's known for certain sequences, which is why I think its reputation precedes it.
Yeah.
And there's always like, a certain, a certain ironic love of certain scenes in it. But I don't think it really amounts to much. Okay, so the problem here for me, right, is that I think it's extremely difficult to cinematize aerial combat.
Okay.
And the whole film is predicated on an aerial training school, right?
Yes.
Like Simpson and Bruckheimer apparently pitched this as like Star Wars on Earth.
Okay.
But for me, the most boring sequences in Star Wars were always the aerial combat scenes, where you have interchangeable, like comically anonymous shots of camera-facing pilots in cockpits, like talking to one another, right? Talking to base or talking to each other, and communicating with visors on and whatever else.
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason why all of the pilots in this have their nicknames printed on their helmets.
Sure, yeah, exactly.
And that's so we can tell who's who. So to have an entire film based in this kind of setting is a conceptual difficulty that I have to get over.
Yeah.
But of course, that obstacle is made easier if it has an emotionally involving script to back it up. And because a lot of the and I think because a lot of the chemistry's here, right, and we'll get to Cruise and McGillis in due course, but because a lot of the chemistry's between the likes of Goose and Maverick and Iceman, because they unfold during the combat sequences, and as a result of those, I just find that the film's quite dull, because what is meant to be...
Can I make a slight correction? That
sorry,
they're not really combat sequences. They're training exercises.
So that's another problem.
That's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely, because another problem here is, like, we don't really get until the very end an actual combat. They're just, as you said, they're training exercises. So there's no real threat or danger involved here. Like, of course, accidents
despite the fact
happening,
that Goose
ends up dying,
dies,
which catalyzes the whole, Maverick's dilemma in the final act. The stakes are established in such a way that I could really care less about what happens to any of these people.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's absolutely beautifully shot.
Oh yeah,
and that's its main. Like, and like whatever. I was thinking the same thing about the aerial I'm not going to say combat sequences, because essentially the training exercises, they're essentially like aesthetically pleasing aerobatics, you know?
Yeah.
Is aerobatics the right word? Whatever it is, when
Yeah,
you know,
I guess
like
so, yeah.
aerial displays, like an air show kind of thing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to piss off the US fighter pilots, then do go ahead. You know, yeah.
But you know what I mean. It's like, so yeah, I was thinking the same thing, like how those sequences are edited together. Because yes, you have, you know, like very very wide shots of, you know, fighter pilots or fighter jets rather. Pursuing each other and like flying in various formations and stuff, and then you've got to cut to an actor in a cockpit, like not a like you know, like a fake cockpit, reacting to a certain kind of incident in the air, and then you've got to cut back out, and you've got to orientate the viewer in terms of like where everybody is and what exactly is happening. And I was kind of, I gotta say, impressed by how coherent it is and how easy to follow it is, because it struck me as like, this has got to be some of the hardest stuff to edit. You know, like you have to have a very particular, you must have to have it very particularly mapped out in your mind exactly what is happening physically at any given moment, because obviously you can't just go out and reshoot it. Like, it's extraordinarily expensive to shoot these sequences as well. So, and obviously there's no CGI here. It's all like, you know, real pilots and real jets. But yeah, the fact that they're training exercises, I just don't care, you know. And by the time you get to the end of, because like, what are the stakes here? Like look, let's kind of break it down dramatically a little bit. You've got Maverick's relationship with Goose. You've got Maverick's relationship with Charlie, Kelly McGillis. You've got Maverick's relationship with Iceman. And then hanging over and maybe you could argue like with Tom Skerritt as well, Viper, the instructor or whatever. That's kind of like a minor thing. You've also got this shadow of like Maverick's famous father hanging over the whole story that is there, and it's discussed, but it never really comes to life. I think you never really feel that. You never really feel anything in it. It's like, or I mean, obviously many people do. I feel that what surprised me on a rewatch here was that the rivalry between Maverick and Iceman is so tame. It's so slight. You know, it never ratchets up. They never, they don't even particularly dislike each other. They're just kind of two kind of cocky, you know, assholes who sort of, you know, two sort of alpha males or whatever who both want to be number one or whatever, but they get along reasonably well, you know. I was like, where's the drama in this?
Yeah, I mean, Iceman's like gripe with Maverick is that he's dangerous.
Yeah,
like, he endangers the lives of others in these training exercises. But yeah, you're right. The whole film is predicated on Maverick's pursuit of the number one spot in this training school, which is already the best of the best of the best.
And the time, like
the elite.
Yeah, the time is taken up. Like the time, the screen time is taken up with a lot of kind of horsing around. You know, like the volleyball and like singing songs and doing karaoke and like riding motorbikes and all this kind of stuff. And it's, you know, it's a strange film. It's kind of like almost like a hangout movie at an aviation academy, in a way. Almost like it's drawing from like the college movies that were popular in the early 80s. Like that there's an element of that in it. It's like, what if we weren't at, you know, what if we weren't in a fraternity? What if we were at aviation academy or whatever, and you had like all these different personalities kind of clashing, and you know, they were, but that's what it kind of feels like to me. It feels like horsing around for a lot of the time.
And if all of that's a pretext for advancing the emotions and interrelations of these characters and developing them as characters, as individuals, then fine. But as you said, they don't. It's and okay, so you've mentioned the three sort of key relationships. The one, you know, the heterosexual romance is dead here. Like, I don't find there's anything between Cruise and McGillis.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which might be deliberate, given the film's not so subtextual gay subtext, which is, you know, I think informs a large part of the ironic love of this film, which I don't really want to discuss. Like
I gotta say, I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit skeptical of that. Like it seems overblown. That was the other thing where it's like,
yeah,
it's not like radiating off the movie. Like there are some funny. I can see some of the funny lines. Like there's Maverick has this kind of tradition with he and Goose, where once they've kind of like successfully completed a training exercise, they do a close flyby on the tower, and he always asks for permission, and permission is always denied to do the flyby, and he does it anyway. And then in the first time he does that in the movie, the guy in the tower, the commanding officer, spills coffee all over himself, and then he comes back and, gives out to Maverick's CO, and then he kind of storms out of the office saying, I want their butts. I want some butts.
I want some butts.
And I can kind of see, like, you can read those scenes, that some of the lines in that way, if you want to reinforce that kind of ironic, affectionate kind of reading of the movie. But
yeah,
it's a little bit overstated as well, isn't it? I mean,
it is, and yeah,
like it's not. Like, it doesn't seem pointed in the way that, like, say, it does in something like Fight Club.
Sure,
where, like, Edward
and
Norton's
the reason why,
the
reason why I was reluctant to discuss it is because I'm, like you, skeptical of the nature of the fandom. Like, even taken on its own terms, it's not emotionally involving. Sorry.
But how do you feel about do you feel about the homoerotic reading of the movie, as though it's just like dripping off every frame of the movie? I don't think it is. I don't perceive that.
In so far as it's set on or within the US airbase, then sure. Like, but it would be the same if it was, like, I guess,
like on a football team, or like,
yeah, exactly, just, right, yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, like, there's that final climactic exchange between Maverick and Iceman, where Iceman's like, you can be my wingman any day, and Cruz is like, Maverick's like, bullshit. You can be mine, and it's like, they embrace, but like, yeah,
it's like us. It's like us as they're trying to determine who's the host and who's the co-host.
Yeah, exactly.
You can be my co-host anytime.
Yeah. I mean, and likewise, you are my co-host because I'm known as the Journeyman.
That's true.
And it's only Journeymen because you're my
would Journeyman would be your call sign.
Journeyman. Paddy Considine's Journeyman was one of my most anticipated films this year.
That's true. You decided to skip it.
Well, I decided to skip it on the grounds of my number one most anticipated film of the year, Ridley Scott's All the Money in the World, not being entirely up to scratch. So you said it's shot beautifully. It's the first evidence we get in his feature films, at least, of Scott using those warm filters and establishing shots that sort of saturate the top fifth of the screen of the sky in a kind of pink or orange hue. Yeah. Which he starts to use quite a bit, even in the films that we'll cover in this episode. Which I'm a sucker for a great establishing shot, I must say.
So much of it, it's shot in the magic hour as well. It's like it's just so beautiful, like the planes in silhouette and everything. How do you feel about the the other reputation that this film has as being like U.S. military? I mean, propaganda is not really the correct term because it's not like it's not like a state produced movie or whatever, but it's the idea that it effectively functions as like a U.S. Navy recruitment video sort of, in a way. I mean, like, makes it look like to take all that influence from like college hangout movies and like put it in the context of it's like, just looks like being in like a naval aviation school is like the best time you could possibly have in your life. Like, yeah,
I mean, apparently Matthew Modine was the first choice for Maverick, and he turned it down because of the film's ostensible politics being at odds with his own, which is where Cruise came in. Cruise obviously having absolutely no fucking qualms whatsoever with any of the film's politics.
But would you even say
it wouldn't work for me? It wouldn't work for me, and like it doesn't even like commit to any like sort of coherent pro
But that's exactly what I'm saying. It's like to say the films. I'm generally skeptical of the whole idea of like a film's politics in general. But the idea of like this film is so apolitical. Like it's like almost studiously apolitical. Like they talk about the MiGs, they don't put it in any kind of geopolitical context or anything like that. They say something about once they come over the 100-mile limit, I want you to like that kind of stuff. It's very I don't know. It's almost like Fantasyland kind of like it's almost abstract.
Yeah, and it's set in a weird temporality as well with regard. I mean, obviously this is like Cold War.
Yeah,
there's an opening
later days of the
inscription
Cold
saying
War,
that
yeah.
Top Gun was set up. The school itself was set up in 1969. But then, it's sort of very, very non-committal in terms of the politics that it needs to allude to. So, on the whole, I have to say, I think this is a very, very dull film. And if it radiated what could be taken to be right-wing politics, I'd probably enjoy it more, because at least it would give me something to sort of be swept along by, Yeah.
It left me pretty cold, and I think I kind of understood rewatching it this time why I wasn't inclined to go back and finish it after falling asleep watching it. I didn't fall asleep because I was bored or whatever, but it was it was late. But I don't know. I mean, it doesn't do it for me. It's not for me.
Yeah, I mean,
Out of 10,
5.
5 for me as well. Yeah, pretty indifferent. Okay, all right. So. Moving on to our third film, Beverly Hills Cop II.
If I only had 3 days to do this, I have to go deep undercover. I'm undercover deep now. This is deep, but I'm going deeper. I don't want no more money or nothing, but I'm going deep undercover. So you sign that for me, and I'm going so deep, sir, you not even know where people going to try to page me. Excellent. No answer, because I'm going to be deep undercover.
I'm tired of your bullshit, Foley. You got 3 days. If I don't see some results by then, I'm gonna grind your ass in the dog meat. You got that?
Deal. I'll have a dog meat ass. Now, could you please sign my authorization for my flash money, please?
Flash money. Just make sure nothing happens to that Ferrari. That's a $50,000 automobile,
Oh, no. It's $67,000 in fast. It goes from 100 to 150 in like...
You just better make sure nothing happens to it.
Don't worry about a thing. Car is safe. I'm driving the car. No one else will be in the car but me. 24 hours a day I will be in the car. I will sleep, eat, drink, shit. I ain't gonna shit. You thought I was gonna really shit. What I look like shitting in the car? I ain't gonna shit. Don't worry about a thing, though. I am on the job. Don't worry about a thing. I'm on the job.
That's what I'm afraid of!
Okay, so Beverly Hills Cop 2, written by Larry Ferguson and Warren Scarron, and again, reteamed Scott with producers Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. From a story by Eddie Murphy and Robert D. Vax. Distributed by Paramount Pictures and released in the US in May of 1987 and in the UK and Ireland in October of 1987. Okay, so the plot per Google. Hard-nosed Detroit cop Axel Foley returns to Los Angeles to help solve another case after police captain Bogomil is gunned down while investigating the Alphabet Crimes, a series of robberies committed by leather-jacketed punks. Axel is reteamed with Billy Rosewood and John Taggart, played by Judge Reinhold and John Ashton, respectively, who have both been busted down to traffic duty by the new police captain. And the three unofficially begin investigating the Alphabet Crimes, which puts them onto the trail of an illegal arms dealer and his blonde-haired hitwoman. So yeah, there's another one I had seen before. Probably quite a few times when I was a kid, a teenager. But for some reason, it's the one of the Beverly Hills Cop trilogy that I find the hardest to remember. It's the one that sticks in my memory the least. And watching it this time, I was trying to figure out why exactly that is. And I think it's because in this one, unlike the first and the third, Axel doesn't really have much of a personal relationship with the villain. So in the first one, and probably most of all in the third one, I need to rewatch them to confirm that. But I think in the third, he kind of is deliberately trying to goad the villain and antagonize them. And in this one, it plays out. I mean, it's not like it plays out like a procedural or something like that, but because we have scenes with the villain separately, but we don't really ever until the end. We don't really get direct interactions, and it plays out more like an investigation. And that means that the plot, which is, in all three films, is fairly forgettable or disposable, or not necessarily that, but just kind of very boilerplate. Like the appeal here is Eddie Murphy in these plots. Like these are Eddie Murphy vehicles, right?
Sure.
So, but the whole arms dealing thing here, like I was watching it thinking, like, the house that he blags his way into. Halfway through, I thought that the firefight took place there at the end, and when it didn't, I was like, what am I thinking of? Some other film. I was sure that it was in some mansion at the end, and it just isn't. So the plot to me is, despite having seen this film at least like 4 or 5 times over the years, is just extremely forgettable. And what I am showing up for is every single moment where Eddie Murphy tries to con his way into a place where he's not supposed to be.
Sure.
Which I just think is like, this is Eddie Murphy at the absolute like apex of his comic abilities, and like I was like howling with laughter at some of the interactions with various people. It's like when this is like firing on all cylinders, it is like hilarious. But unfortunately, as we get into the third act, that kind of fades away a little bit, and he starts to play it more straight, and the plot sort of takes more center stage.
The crimes themselves are basically MacGuffins, right? And I'm not convinced that we're even meant to follow or care about them. Like, I couldn't tell you a synopsis for this film in terms of what the alphabet crimes. Like, remind me why they're even called alphabet crimes, or are they proceeding through the alphabet?
Yeah, exactly. What's happening is the alphabet robberies are. They ultimately learn that they're essentially decoys. That they're carrying out this chain of robberies, so that when they finally rob the like gym or like health spa or something like that he owns, he's like divested himself of all these other businesses, or stopped paying insurance on all these other businesses that he owns, and the only one that he still has insured is this health club or gym or whatever it is, or is it a firing range or whatever the hell it is, one of his businesses. He's continuing to insure, so he's like staged all these robberies so that when finally he robs his own business, the insurance will pay out and it won't seem suspicious. It'll just be like, oh, he was a victim of the alphabet crimes, so yes, they're proceeding through the alphabet. Whatever. I mean, it's fine. It's fine. Who cares? But like, it's and
I agree.
You're here for Eddie Murphy.
Sure, I agree. It's meant to be of secondary importance. Like, for me, early on, this felt like a typical sequel to me in some ways. Like, in the early scenes, you can feel the mechanisms of the script sort of just grinding along, how to get Eddie Murphy back into Los Angeles, because otherwise it wouldn't be called Beverly Hills Cop. Like, I'd forgotten, having seen the first film only once 12 years ago. Again, I watched it during undergrad, although as part of my degree. I'd forgotten that he was actually from Detroit, and so the comic concept, if you like, is him showing up, this hardened tough guy from the streets of Detroit, wisecracking his way through politically correct Beverly Hills, right? So obviously he
politically correct and like polite and like upper class and like kind of refined and everything, and also they're portrayed as like extremely gullible. Like the scene where he wets his face with like water, and he like comes in with this the bag of Billy Rosewood's like vitamins or whatever. He brings them in, and he's holding them, and he pretends that they're like these armor piercing plutonium bullets or something like that, highly combustible, and that whole scene where she's like so gullible. That scene is hilarious.
Like that culture, I think, embodied also by, because these are essentially like buddy cop films as well in a way.
Sort of.
So his partner, Judge Reinhold Rosewood, he sort of embodies that culture, if you like as a very uncool guy who's brought out of this sort of self-inhibiting white bread shell by Axel. So like he becomes very endearing as well through that.
This one introduces like a sort of an unhealthy obsession with like guns and like heavy artillery on his part.
To a almost like sort of nerdy degree. So this was, as I understand it, originally after the massive success of the first film. And we should actually do a Journeyman episode, I think, on Martin Brest, by the way. This was originally...
You want an excuse to watch Geely?
Yes, that's exactly. You found me out. This was apparently originally planned to be a television series.
Beverly Hills Cop was?
Yes.
Okay.
Which Murphy was against because he didn't want to really go outside of cinema, apparently.
Right, sure.
Which you can completely understand given the box office potential
in the 80s, yeah.
But I can totally imagine it as a series. Like,
they were talking about rebooting it as a series because the way Beverly Hills Cop 4 has been in development for like 20 years.
Yeah.
I think it's back in development as a feature now, but I think they even shot a pilot, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Where Axel Foley was the police chief or something like that, and the cop, I guess he must have been in Beverly Hills, but anyway, his nephew or something like that is. But anyway, it wasn't picked up, didn't go to series, and then it was put back into development as a feature that Brett Ratner was supposed to direct, which is obviously unlikely to happen at this point. But
no, probably not.
Yeah, I mean, this was a huge hit. Like, so a budget of $20 million, worldwide gross of $300 million.
Yeah. I mean, so my point is with the TV thing, I can sort of totally imagine it actually as a sort of weekly policier / caper comedy. That sort of, so films, because of the very different modes of production, films demand a spectacle in a way that television series don't necessarily have to. Like, you can have a filler episode or a sort of unevenness is embedded into the mode of production with television, whereas films, they have to deliver. And so this feels like it should be a much smaller film than obviously they were going for, because like what we've mentioned, like the script is like there's so much like plot here, like unnecessarily, and it's like they didn't need to make it like that. I mean, obviously it was a success commercially for them, so who cares?
There's nothing really wrong with the plot or anything like that. Like I think that the plot might even be involving if we were given a stronger antagonistic relationship between the villain and the hero, instead of separating them for the majority of the running time. Like, I'm thinking, have you seen Beverly Hills Cop 3?
No, I haven't.
Where it's set at the theme park, and he knows that the guy who owns the theme park is a villain, right? I'm sorry, it's not the guy who owns it. It's like one of the whatever it is. I can't remember exactly, but he spends most of the movie just like showing up to events. It's kind of like when they go to the Playboy Mansion in this one, and
which is another great scene. Yeah,
it's a great scene. Yeah, and he like confronts him in front of Hugh Hefner and everything. But it's like that throughout the whole movie, where he's like showing up to this thing where I think the character's name is Ellis DeWald, and he shows up to the like award ceremony where he's supposed to be getting an award from the community or something like that, and he's goes up on stage and pretends to be his friend and everything, and like just antagonizing him, trying to get him, trying to kind of shake him up and get him to. And those scenes are so funny, and it gives you a real kind of like strong antagonistic relationship to kind of latch onto that's not strictly plot based,
Yeah. So he comes back to Beverly Hills here because his old captain gets shot and gunned down, as you said. I mean, he doesn't even fucking die. Like, at least make at least heighten the stakes, to amplify some sort of drama.
Right, because that's the plot in the first film, is that his captain in Detroit gets killed and he traces it to Beverly Hills,
which I had forgotten. So I was like, okay, so this, again, early on I'm thinking this is very typically a sequel because it has this time it's personal angle. So I was very much surprised when I researched the first film again, having forgotten the plot, and realised that there's a sort of personal element to the pursuit of justice in that film. So I mean, I think we're coming at the same problem from different ends. For you, he has to have a more concrete relationship with the antagonist.
Yeah,
and
so.
which is so in my terms, it was like, there needs to be some sort of personal investment, like, and related to that, I think another problem here is that nothing really seems to be a challenge for Axel here. Like, like I know that he's going to outwit and outsmart and verbally, machine gun everyone and leave the scene before they've even figured out what's happened. And that's the charm and appeal of this character and this star. But again, there's no real, like, nothing really seems to be a challenge for him.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think I don't feel that the character and there being a challenge are mutually exclusive, because I think there could be, very much so. So yeah, I wasn't really hot on this film at all, really.
I definitely enjoy it because, like, yes, you're sort of just waiting for the next set piece, as it were, where what institution or what business or what kind of where's Axel going to have to fast talk his way into next and con his way into, but yes, you're waiting for that next moment, but they come so frequently, and it's only the last like 10 maybe 15 minutes where it kind of dries up a little bit, and it just kind of falls into beats that really feel like they're prefiguring Michael Bay. Like it's such a Bad Boys kind of vibe to the end of this movie with a big shootout. Even visually, I mean, Michael Bay I think took a lot visually from Tony Scott. But would you agree that those moments where he's like conning the guys into like quitting working on the house, or at the beginning when he's in Detroit and the guy recognizes him as being a cop and he decides to flip it around and accuse him of being a cop and starts demanding that he prove that he's not wearing a wire, and he's doing this thing where he's like just like basically like shouting him down and doing this like crazy thing where he's like rolling his eyes around in his head.
I do enjoy that, and a little goes a long way with it. It does feel less, from what I recall anyway, from the first film. Again, obviously, many years since I saw it, but this does feel less improvisatory than the first film, and more of a. It's almost as if they suddenly became burdened by the idea of having to deliver after the surprise success of the first one. And for that reason, it doesn't feel as free flowing somehow.
Sure. One I push back a little bit on the idea of it lending itself to a TV show format, because the major criticism of Beverly Hills Cop 3 is that they went for a PG-13 rating, which kind of hamstrings Eddie Murphy's ability to really sort of cut loose in character.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think Beverly Hills Cop 3 feels a little bit kind of toothless in a way.
Right.
Even though I like it a lot more than most people do. I think it's still pretty funny, but it has a more memorable plot because of the personal relationship with the villain. But yeah, I think that's the problem with. I mean, you could do it now, I suppose.
Yeah.
But like to do that on TV in the 80s, you wouldn't be able to have the Axel Foley that you had in movies.
Yeah.
But yeah. So out of 10?
5.
5?
Yeah.
Easily a 7.
Oh, really?
Easily a 7. Yeah, it's just so like I said, I was like howling with laughter at parts of this film, and the fairly uninvolving plot, whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
It's not bad, It's just you're just sort of waiting it out.
I mean,
you don't have to wait too long.
Yeah, I mean, as a comic myself, of course, I have a a stronger recognition of humor, so. Yeah, that's why I'm not able to give it anything more than a 5.
Okay.
One final thing before we move on, and in the interests of creating some sort of intertextual Journeyman canon and plugging a previous episode, did you notice the George P. Cosmatos posters in Rosewood's house?
Yeah, for Cobra and First Blood Part 2.
Yeah.
His whole house is like a hothouse, like full of like all these like tropical plants and like fish tanks, and he has like an array of like heavy duty weapons on his on racks on the back of his bathroom door where most people would have bath towels, and he has these George Cosmatos posters.
Pretty cool. I mean, that was the thing that excited me most when I saw them. I was like, oh, George Lucas Matters.
All right, we move on to our next film, 1990's Revenge.
Do you love me?
Boy, I never wanted to love you.
That's not an answer. Say it. Say you love me. I'll say it for you, Mireja. I love you.
I don't talk like that.
You do. Say it, Cochran, right now.
Moray, I love you.
Now I have nowhere to go.
It's not true. You don't have to go anywhere. I want you to stay with me.
So Revenge, Tony Scott's fourth feature, was written by Jeffrey Allen Fiskin and Jim Harrison from Harrison's earlier magazine short story published in Esquire magazine 1979, produced by Stanley Rubin and Hunt Lowry for Rastor and distributed by Columbia Pictures and New World Pictures. Made for $20 million, and it made far less than that in the US. 15, well, I mean, not far less, but 15, just over $15 million at the US box office. Released in the UK on the 22nd of June 1990 and in Ireland a month later. And the story revolves around Jay Cochran, played by Kevin Costner, a newly retired US Navy pilot, travels to Mexico to spend time with his friend Tibby Mendez, played by Anthony Quinn, a powerful but corrupt businessman. While there, Jay meets Tibby's beautiful wife, Maria, played by Madeleine Stowe, who has become unhappy in her marriage. Jay and Maria soon engage in a steamy affair, but when Tibby learns of the relationship from his henchman, Caesar, played by Thomas Millian, he sets out to get even with both of them. Had you seen this before?
No. So this is the first one on the, well, with the exception of the shorts, this is the first of the features that I hadn't seen before.
And
probably the
you've
one
seen
that
both versions of it.
This is probably the one of the five that I hadn't seen that I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it kind of feels like his most obscure feature.
Yeah.
Yes, I saw both versions. Initially, we had both downloaded the 2007 director's cut.
Yeah.
But we decided that it would be better if we watched the theatrical cut. Because, despite Tony Scott saying in 2007 that this is the film I always wanted to make, that's never really the case. It can't be the case. Like Tony Scott in 2007 is a very different filmmaker from Tony Scott in 1989. So, yeah, I watched them both out of curiosity. Primarily because the director's cut, unlike the vast majority of director's cuts, is actually really, really truncated. It's 20 minutes shorter than the theatrical cut, and that includes time made up for reinserted scenes. So to give you an idea, and almost all of that comes off the first act of the movie. Like, to give you an idea, the scene where, in the theatrical cut, the scene where Tibby finds out about Jay and is it Maria or Mariah?
Maria.
When he finds out about Jay and Maria's affair in the theatrical cut, that's 55 minutes into the film. In the director's cut, it's 35 minutes in.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
wow.
so like it's massively truncated in the front end. I'll
benefit?
No. So okay. I will. I'll talk. You haven't seen it, so I'll talk a little bit about that after we get it. We'll talk about the theatrical cut primarily, and then I'll just compare it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, watching it, obviously fully aware of the fact that a director's cut was subsequently released many years later in a more truncated form. Burdened by that knowledge, I was very much aware of how baggy the first hour of this is. I was like, fucking hell, when's there going to be any sort of inciting incident that needs to be avenged? You know, the title is a strange one actually, because it's never clear which revenge we're sort of supposed to.
Yeah, there are multiple revenges.
Be on board. Yeah. So for me, the setup, as I've just described it, allows for, hopefully, I'm thinking when I'm watching it, some sort of emotionally twisty drama about a dude cuckolding an old pal, right? So when they first have sex, and we cut back and forth between them in the throes of passion to Anthony Quinn dancing downstairs at some public ceremony, you know, that's all well and good for me. Like the emotional complications, to put it simply, right? And the moral and ethical complications also. That are also complicated by the fact that we know that Quinn is a dangerous man.
Yeah.
Or at least we're meant to think that he is, and that he loves his wife genuinely. You know, there's a sincerity there, although he is emotionally inhibiting and abusive.
He's emotionally abusive, but it's not like we're not just making an assumption about how dangerous he is, because at that point we've already seen him kill that guy. The two guys who have been trying to, I don't know exactly what they're supposed to have been doing. They've been kind of doing something behind his back, and he kills the underling in front of the guy who's kind of the guy who has actually betrayed him, and kind of gets him back under his thumb. And it's a very brutal sort of cold-hearted scene.
Yeah, and I do like it that we're first introduced to his dangerous potential when he throws the dog into the swimming pool.
Yeah.
Like he acts irrationally at the fact that this dog has just come along and picks up the leather jacket that Costner's just given him.
Yeah, Jay just gave him his navy jacket.
Yeah.
So like that. Okay, so the first thing that I was thinking of watching this film is that the premise didn't make a lot of sense. Like, why is this American career Navy pilot buddies with this much older like Mexican cartel guy who, you know, we learn it's not like they're both from the same place. They clearly don't move in the same social circles. There's something about, he flew him to Alaska on a hunting trip once. Like, but I don't know, it just feels weird. Like, does he not have any... He knows who he is. He knows what he's capable of. He knows, like, his social position. Like, why does he seem to have no qualms about that? And it just... I couldn't square that right from the beginning. I found it very, just, like, confusing on a basic level.
And when he shows up and Caesar, Tibby's henchman, says, "Oh, you know, I'll show you to the room," he obviously doesn't like Jay immediately, and Jay doesn't like him. Again, inexplicably, you know, if he's like hosting him, like you'd think that the henchman would be at least under orders to like be civil and welcoming and hospitable and whatever else.
He admonishes him for being 2 days late.
Yeah, and Jay's like,
I don't work for Tibby. You know,
exactly.
He says Tibby Tiburon insists on punctuality, and it's like, well, in that case, you better adhere to those rules or whatever, or he'll fire your ass. Because, like, I don't work for him. The whole setup is odd. It's strange, and like I wonder, is it just kind of poorly adapted in that respect from the source text? Like, there's maybe just like loads of backstory or some sort of explanatory context. Because I was thinking, like, if you're going to get rid of it, and you know, that's certainly an option and sometimes a necessity to get rid of that kind of stuff. But if you're going to do that, maybe you should just kind of reconceive the character. Like, why Cochran doesn't need to be a Navy pilot in this story at all. He could be anything.
Absolutely
he doesn't even do any flying in the movie.
And he's not even hard. Like, he just
exactly until he is. Until he is,
yes.
You know, and that's a kind of a sort of slightly jarring shift as well. He just doesn't come across that way, and it seems that he would be that everything would just square more easily. It's to be honest, like it almost feels like an imposition. Like maybe he wasn't originally. I don't know. But this is how it feels. You know, like the studio was like, we want you to kind of do a Top Gun callback at the beginning, and let's have him in a fighter jet. Let's have him in the Navy. You know, so we can say from the director of Top Gun and have this in the trailer. You know, but like it would make much more sense if he was a commercial pilot, maybe, who was constantly like shepherding or bringing things in and out of Mexico. Maybe, I don't know. It's odd. It's an odd setup.
So problems, right? Stowe's adultery, Maria's adultery, I think is made too convenient. Like, she's neglected, sure, she's emotionally abused, she's wanting a kid and he doesn't because he's got loads already.
11 kids.
she's much younger than him.
Yeah. At one point he says, at one point he says he thinks that he should have married the mother or something like that.
Yeah. But I'm thinking, what if she wasn't? What if she wasn't any of those things?
Well, that's an interesting question, because in the director's cut she isn't. So because in the director's cut, I agree that the first hour of this film is a tad sluggish, but in the director's cut, Scott like way overdoes it in cutting, like obviously responding to that criticism. He overdoes it to the extent that it just makes no sense at all. Like, in the director's cut, the story is that Jay Cochran, retiring United States naval aviator, flies down to Mexico to visit his good buddy Tiburon Mendez, the head of some sort of like cartel or something, and immediately just starts having an affair with his wife, who's like instantly just jumps into bed with him, despite the fact that they both know like who Tiburon is and like what he's capable of. And it just, all that stuff about like that context of she desperately wants a kid, and he's like, no, I don't want to father a child, and I've already done that part of my life is behind me, and I just don't want another kid. And then he also does this thing where he's like, you have such a beautiful body. You don't ruin it with it's too beautiful for bearing children. Let's keep it that way, or something like that. All that sort of stuff, and you can understand. And also the scene where they bond, where it's like, there's like he knows the same poets. That I was like, what the hell is this as well? He's like a naval aviator, like he's also a poet, and he's also like this like hardened assassin or something, and like that's gone as well, right? So you just get this scene where she just, in fact, you get a scene that doesn't make a lot of sense, because she, the way she shows up to his beach house, and brings the book of poems, and it's like in the theatrical cut, you can kind of read that scene as she has convinced herself that she's just going there to be nice and bring the book of poems, but on some deeper level, she's going there because she's drawn to him, and she's pushed away from Tibby because of that other scene we had where we can see that they're just like, they don't belong together at all.
Yeah.
So in the director's cut, she just shows up there. She has the book in her hand, but it's like, because the other scene was cut, and then in the following scene when they're on the beach with the dog, and he's doing the trick where the dog is like grabbing the thing out of his mouth, he has the book in his hand. It's like, well, we just cut that scene where she gives him the book because we didn't have the other scene, and it like whittles the all of the dramatic context away, and it just leaves you with this kind of like vaguely absurd kind of recklessness on both of their parts. That said, I kind of like this movie. So after all that's out of the way, in either version, because I watched the director's cut kind of like filling in the blanks myself, once that's all out of the way, and we get to the part where Tibby has taken his revenge, and he's left Jay to die in the desert, and he's left Maria to die in a brothel.
Yeah.
From that point on, I think it morphs kind of slightly unconvincingly, but slightly satisfyingly as well, into this kind of like sleazy, bleak, sadistic revenge thriller.
Yeah, but I think the strengths of that can only be taken if you accept it as a standalone film in itself. Like, it doesn't really make much sense as the disproportionately swift second half of a film that doesn't really cohere.
Sure.
But just okay. So I want to dwell, if I may, just a little bit on that first half, though, that baggy first half. So there's so in the longer version, there's zero sexual chemistry between these two protagonists. Like, I don't buy for an instant that they're drawn to each other, that there's some sort of, flame that ignites between them immediately. Like, they don't even know each other. Like
they don't have to know each other. I mean, like, she is basically, like, you get the impression from the way that her life is portrayed is that the only people that she ever has any contact with are like Tibby's older gangster friends. And this is the first guy that she's probably seen in years, you know, who sort of seems like a desirable partner for her. And we have the scenes kind of where they bond and everything.
But he's he's fumbling about with like lemons and shit. Like, you know, when he's gonna make some lemonade, and he's just conveniently bought some lemons from the supermarket or whatever, and he's like fucking dropping them. He's fumbling about. It's like, where's this guy's charm? You know, like it doesn't make any. I mean, you could say, okay, he represents a counterpoint to Tibby's masculine aggression or whatever,
but he also represents an escape from the life that she doesn't want to live in anymore. That she kind of was, you know, she jokes about it in one scene where she pretends that it was like an arranged marriage or something like that, and he believes her, and then she kind of goes, "No, I'm only joking. You know, I do love him, or I did love him." But it's like, yeah, when she was probably like 15 or something, he was like this, you know, alluring older man or whatever. But it's no, I think the dramatic structure and everything is there. I agree that I was trying to think, like, Kevin Costner. I haven't seen that many Kevin Costner movies. You know, I've seen JFK, and I've seen the Robin Hood movie that he was in around this time as well.
And the Untouchables.
Oh, the Untouchables, of course, yeah. But I've never seen him in a romantic role like this. I suppose there's an element of that in the Robin Hood movie, but yeah, I didn't have as much trouble buying the chemistry between Costner and Stowe as I did Costner's metamorphosis into this kind of like ruthless killer.
So
but again, it wasn't like, again, wasn't a huge problem, but like, I don't know, again, beautifully shot, like really beautifully shot, and just kind of like, it has that bleak, sleazy kind of pulpy, noirish, neo-western kind of flavor that I found once I was over the kind of the hump of the first half hour, but honestly, the other thing is that it surprised me at how dark it went. I didn't expect, you know, like Tibby to put Maria in a whorehouse and like slash her face and like have. Oh, there's a scene restored to the director's cut. Actually, there's a scene in the theatrical cut where one of the Johns that comes to the brothel and sees Maria over and over again is actually one of the guys who works for Tibby and has always kind of, you know, been attracted to but also sort of resented and hated Maria because she's been kind of cold to him. So he's showing up and he's like, he says something in the theatrical cut, it's actually there, but it doesn't have the context that explains it. He says something like, "You always forget my name," or something. "Well, you'll remember my name now." And then there's a scene later on where Tibby actually kills him because he finds out from the madam at the brothel, I think, that this guy has been, as he says, disrespecting his wife. Like, you know, like what he put his wife in a brothel and slashed her face open. But apparently, like, anyway, this guy going to visit his wife in the brothel is disrespecting her, and he ends up getting killed. I like all that kind of stuff, you know.
Okay. I mean, it's too little, too
that
late
all
for
works
me.
for me.
Too
I can
little,
see that.
Too late. So, as I said, disproportionately swift second half. Like, Costner, he's left for dead, which I don't believe either. I don't think Tibby, being the character that he's established to be, would leave him to die in the desert. I think they would just kill him. But, you know, whatever, they can't do that because the end of Fulham doesn't exist. So Costner has to recover and heal, and we're meant to also sense a connection between him and the Mexican who nurses him to recovery, which happens like in a very, very quick like sequence. It doesn't give you any space.
That's to introduce Miguel Ferrer and John Leguizamo's characters, who are related to that guy's Joe Santos, I think is the name of the actor who plays Ibarra. His wife was somehow killed by Tibby, or Tibby was responsible for his death. So Ferrer and Leguizamo's characters, Amador and Ignacio, they come and they help Jay to find Maria in the brothel and all that kind of stuff. And that's when it starts to become this kind of like sleazy, sort of grimy kind of noir thriller that I was definitely on board with it at that point. Even though I would agree, I'd prefer somebody else in the lead role.
Yeah, I mean, like, it just gives no time or space for us to develop a friendship, or for them to develop a friendship, Ferrer and Costner, and for us to, like, trust them in any way. It's like, it's weird. It does give an unintentional tension to everything, because we're not really sure if Ferrer's just, like, showed up to ultimately betray him or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm not convinced that that's a deliberate tension, if you know what I mean.
I also like the cowboy, the Texan guy, played by James Gammon, that he kind of befriends, and then he's like dying of some. He's like, I don't know what it is he's supposed to have. He just dies. But it's good though too, because it's like it gives the whole film this like patina of like bleakness, like just like overriding, overwhelming kind of like. And then Maria dies at the end too, and like I love that whole scene at the end in the convent, and you know. That just the whole second half of the movie works for me quite strongly, and the first half, yes, the pacing is off. I think there's probably a happy medium between the theatrical cut and the director's cut, where you don't cut muscle, you don't cut like crucial dramatic scenes that provide psychological context.
Sure.
You just whittle it up and like make it a little tighter, like cut maybe 10 minutes out of the front end of it, and restore some of the. Also, what's restored is more violence and like much longer sex scenes in the director's cut, because apparently that was part of the clash between Scott and one of the producers. So the producer was older and didn't really approve of that kind of material. And
I can't imagine at this point Costner approving of it either. At that point in his career. Yeah,
at that point, there was that was part of it as well. Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on. We move on, or do you have anything else to say?
What would you give it out of 10?
I'm going to go with a 7.
It's 3 5s in a row for me for Tony Scott at this point.
Ooh. Yeah. Uh-oh. Hopefully things pick up. Let's move on to his 5th feature film, 1990's Days of Thunder.
You're not looking too good. How many of these things you chew every day?
What'd you come here for?
Take you to the hospital?
If it'd been anybody but a damn woman doctor, I'd been back on the track weeks ago.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Listen, man. I've raced with my legs broke, heart bruised, eyes popping out of my head like they're on springs. And this is gonna go away just like anything else. As far as I'm concerned, I'm gonna live forever. Unless I go to some damn hospital where they take your shoes off and make you shut your eyes and bang you dead.
What'd you win this for? This one. Right here. What'd you win this for?
Doesn't it say?
Yeah, it's the Winston Cup, buddy. Well, hell, that's an easy one to forget. What's your name, or has that slipped your mind, too?
Screw you, man.
Okay. We can go down there and fix your head. We can fix it right here. Now, what's it gonna be?
Okay, so the final film on this episode is going to be 1990's Days of Thunder. Again, produced by Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, and written by Robert Towne, from A Story by Towne and Tom Cruise. Distributed by Paramount and released in the US in June of 1990 and in the UK and Ireland in August of 1990. In the fast-paced world of NASCAR, a rivalry brews between rookie hotshot Cole Trickle, played by Tom Cruise, and veteran racer Rowdy Burns, played by Michael Rooker. When both of them are seriously injured in competition, the former bitter rivals become close friends. With Cole's spirits restored by a romance with neurosurgeon Dr. Claire Lewicki, played by Nicole Kidman, and Rowdy still sidelined by injuries, Cole decides to race Rowdy's car in the Daytona 500 against underhanded newcomer Russ Wheeler, played by Carrie Elways. So this is the second film on this episode that I had not seen before, and the reason I had never seen it before was because it has a reasonably middling reputation, and it's about NASCAR.
Yeah, so I care for NASCAR as much as I do fighter jets. And I say that because I think this film was pitched and marketed as a Top Gun, sort of.
Very much so, yeah.
And I think I was...
Getting the band back together kind of
thing. Absolutely. Yeah. And I was led to believe that it was a poor Top Gun imitation. And I must say that thus far, I mean, this is the final film on this episode, but thus far in our 3-part series on Tony Scott, this is the film that surprised me most.
Okay.
It exceeded my low expectations by a long shot. What about you?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't know if I would say by a long shot, but yeah, it definitely was a lot better than I was expecting, and I enjoyed it. I like it more than Top Gun.
So, I think the action itself is easier to cinematize, just easier than aerial exercises, for instance. And so the spatial dynamics tend to be more involving as action sequences. Like, you've still got the equivalent of cockpit shots here, but the cutaways to cars overtaking other cars are at least coherent. And I know that you thought that the spatial dynamics were coherent in the fighter jet sequences in Top Gun. There's a reason why NASCAR's a sport that's shown on television.
No, I get what you mean. I mean, like, just even the environment is like, it's so they're on a track, you know, whereas in Top Gun they're just in the air, and we don't know like the area that they're covering or like how vast it is, and we're cutting from close-ups of the jets to like extremely wide shots of the jets. And I get it. What I was saying in relation to Top Gun was just that I was impressed by how coherent it was, and like how difficult it must be to actually conceptualize and edit those sequences.
I get you.
But yes, I agree, because in this you can have cockpit close-ups of the drivers, but you can also have POV shots from the cockpit. That you can then cut to a wider shot that shows the cars in the same position, and it's much easier. I imagine it to be much easier to edit this kind of material in a way that's coherent, and you're given a kind of structure that allows you to explore possibilities for kind of tension within that structure in a way that you're not given kind of any structure when they're just like flying around in the air.
Yeah. And the second strength, if we're to continue comparisons to Top Gun for me, is the romantic lead is much better here. It's much more convincing. Kidman and Cruise's first kiss during the medical examination, I think, is dynamite. Like, he sort of steals it from her, but, she kisses him back. That might say more about me and my romantic ideals than it does the film. I don't know, but...
You mean the scene where he takes her hand and puts it on his crotch?
No! Oh, God, no. No, when she's giving him a meticulous checkup, she kisses him, and then So I think that aspect of this story works a lot more. And the third thing for me is, if we think of the equivalent in Top Gun being the Iceman Maverick tension relationship, Michael Rooker here, replacing the sort of Val Kilmer or inhabiting the Val Kilmer role, who we spoke of very fondly when we talked about Rosewood on our John Singleton episode. Rooker, for me, watching him in this got me thinking that he kind of steals every film he's in, or he steals every film that I've seen him in, unless Robert Duvall also happens to be in that film, because I think Duvall
that's what I was
really
thinking.
Great.
I was thinking it's hard to go wrong. Like, no matter what you might say about the rest of the film, it's hard to go wrong with Michael Rooker and Robert Duvall.
Yeah, I mean,
just like it's hard to go wrong with Michael Pattison and Robert Lowe.
Absolutely. So yeah, like, Duvall's plausible as a father figure to Cruise, but he's also a veteran of this racing circuit, and his performance lends the milieu itself a real sort of credibility. So I really enjoyed watching them. And another thing to say here is that I like how the competitive circuit, or the nature of the circuit, is depicted. So, like, Rooker's set up to be this antagonist, but actually there's a mutual respect and even friendship between him and Cruise, even before they're involved in their crash, because the synopsis that Google gives that you read out there suggests that there's a massive dramatic shift in their relationship, but actually they're hanging out before that.
Are they?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't like,
because in the hospital,
I wouldn't want to overstate
in the hospital, like, they have they're not like enemies or anything like that, but there's a stronger rivalry between Cruise and Rooker in this than there isn't between Cruise and Kilmer in Top Gun.
Would you say? Yeah, maybe.
Just because of the nature of what they're doing. I mean, like, it's a directly competitive thing where they're like both like literally racing for pole position, whereas in Top Gun they're supposed to be on the same team.
Sure. Yeah, I get it.
You know?
Yeah. So my main problem with this film is that isn't prioritized more. And in fact, Ruka just
me too. Yeah.
In fact, Ruka just disappears. Like, we never even go back to him once Cruise makes the promise that he's going to race his car at Daytona. So
right, and so it switches rivalries in the third act onto Carrie Elways, and Carrie Elways comes out of nowhere, and yes, he's like playing a kind of an arrogant bastard who's only kind of like, he was kind of a phony as well. He's like, he pretends to be kind of sympathetic to Trickle, and but yeah, I mean, I kind of find that's my major criticism of it, is that by the time you build to this big climactic thing, because it's essentially the film it reminded me of a lot was The Wrestler, where you've got he shouldn't go back to doing this, and it even has the same kind of plot device that Top Gun has, where he's kind of like shaken by his experience. You know, he's afraid. He sees what's happened to. Rooker's character has gotten like a brain injury.
Yeah.
And he's terrified of that, and the whole theme of like, wanting to control things that can't be controlled. And like Nicole Kidman says to him at one point, like, we can't, like, control is an illusion, and like, we can't control what's going to happen to us tomorrow. We can't control what's going to happen on the road. We can't even control what's going to happen inside our own bodies. But you're sort of like a narcissistic egomaniac who thinks that he can control everything. Rooker's character kind of recedes back and melts into the theme of the film and sort of serves that purpose. And then it's all about Trickle coming back and having one last race at Daytona. But the rivalry between Cruise and Elwes never comes to life, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it kind of robs the film of its. It still has that thing of like, okay, he's overcoming something in himself, but the Elwes character is just a non-factor for me.
Because we should say, just to specify, that Ruka agrees to have brain surgery only if, in return, Cruise races his car at Daytona. The reason being is that he needs the sponsorship deal. He needs the sponsorship money. But in retrospect, when it gets to the end of the film and we don't even return to Ruka, like, it just feels like a cheap way by which to catalyze Cruise's return to the racetrack. So I agree, it's robbed of any wider emotional meaning. And of course, you've got Duval at the end, and there's a certain investment on his part in the race. But yeah, it seems to miss a trick.
Yeah.
Another thing to say here is I think Cruise has developed as an actor since Top Gun in this film.
Oh, definitely. I mean, like, he came very close to winning the Best Actor Oscar the previous year for Born on the 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think the fact that he didn't win it affected the budget of this film, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right.
Is that right? Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
That they cut the budget. Yeah.
Like, the budget was already spiraling out of control, is my understanding, and the budget was then cut on the back of Cruise not winning the Oscar. Have you seen Born on the 4th of July?
Yeah.
I haven't. But
he's good in it.
Yeah, I can imagine he's good.
Because I was actually thinking, I'm not a huge fan of like young Tom Cruise. Like of that era of films like Top Gun. I just thought, or like Risky Business or whatever. Something about him that I don't think he kind of comes into his own until I need to revisit Rain Man and see what he's like in that, but certainly kind of Born on the 4th of July, and I think he's good in this. And then like once you get into the 90s, like Interview with the Vampire and things like that, like Mission Impossible.
But yeah, as I said, this film surprised me, and for all of those reasons, and I think it's an extremely solid film. And one thing we haven't said, and it feels like now in retrospect that we said it as a compensatory thing for the other films, is that this film again looks beautiful.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. I do find it interesting though, the device of like allowing us into this kind of fairly esoteric sort of world of NASCAR. I mean, I don't know anything about NASCAR, and I haven't. It's funny how like I don't watch sports. I have no interest in sports, but sports movies can be really, really compelling. But you need an in, right? And in this case, it's that Cole is like a prodigy. He's like he's just sort of preternaturally gifted when it comes to like racing cars, driving cars, but he doesn't know anything about cars. So that allows Robert Duvall to like explain to him and explain to us in the same breath what's at stake and what's going wrong and what they need to do and everything. So like, you know, you have these like car assembly montages that are really cool where he's like building the car. Well, I don't really quite understand it, because Cole's reason for getting involved in NASCAR, I think he wants to like race like Formula One cars or something like that. But he gets involved in NASCAR because he says the cars all have to be exactly the same, and that it's all about the driver. The cars are all built to weigh the same, and they have to have this, like, everything has to be kind of to specification. But in that case, what's the point of having a custom car? I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, and like the significance of different engines, and because you know Randy Quaid, who manages both teams,
don't they all have to have the same top speed and the same horsepower and same weight? And
don't ask me; I'm the wrong person to ask. Honestly,
I thought you were a huge NASCAR fan, no?
I know as little as you do about NASCAR racing.
But isn't NASCAR appeals to the same personality type that professional wrestling appeals to?
Fuck off. Also, I just said NASCAR racing there, but the R in NASCAR stands for racing, so I shouldn't say NASCAR racing.
Right. The thing that excited me most about this movie actually was that I want to go back and revisit I believe season 3 episode of The Simpsons, Saturdays of Thunder. Where,
okay.
Bart becomes a soapbox derby racer, where like Homer is helping him build his soapbox derby racer. And it's like, you know, like soapbox derby thing kind of is like a downhill, you know, gravity driven race or whatever. And he ends up getting, Martin Prince has the perfectly engineered car, but he ends up getting crippled in an accident, and then Bart has to race his. So it's like, it's a full parody of Days of Thunder. It came out like the following year, so I'm excited. It's an episode I've seen loads of times, but I go back and get all the references now. Do you want anything to add?
Nothing other than my score. So after 3 solid 5s, Scott ups his game to his 7.
7?
Yeah.
I'm going to go with a 6 on this one.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I feel like just because you haven't advanced strong enough criticisms to justify the qualified like that 6 represents.
I think the third act and the fact that the Carrie Elways rivalry, it feels kind of empty, and yeah, it feels like at the end I kind of just like it was a bit of a shrug for me for the final act, but no,
Okay. That's allowed, you know. Okay.
And I say like sports movies are exciting and all that, but I mean, really, there is also kind of a ceiling there as well, like, in terms of my interest. Like they have to work harder than other stories to kind of draw me in, and it's to the film's credit that it drew me in to the extent that it did. But it didn't convert me into a NASCAR enthusiast or anything like that.
Okay, thank you. You've been listening to the first of a 3-part series of episodes dedicated to Tony Scott. On the next episode, we'll be covering The Last Boy Scout, True Romance, Crimson Tide, The Fan, and Enemy of the State. My name's Michael Pattison. I've been here with my co-host,
Bobby Lowe.
Follow us on Twitter @_Journeymen, and please subscribe and share our episodes through SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, or YouTube. Cheers.
Thank you.